Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest.
We're going to make this country safe again. I'm proud to be a part of this administration. We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
March 20th, 2025, the Constitutional Crisis is Here edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast in Washington, D.C. Joining me from New York is, of course, John Dickerson, the co-anchor of the CBS Evening News and the anchor of CBS Evening News Plus. Hello, John.
Hello.
Oh, all right. Hello. That was a weird, long hello that had nothing after it, but so it goes.
Well, I'm reserving my my time. I'm reserving
your
my
words.
time. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Emily is still on vacation. No matter, because we have beloved occasional Gabfest host Ruth Marcus. Ruth, who's been writing for The New Yorker after making a very principled resignation from The Washington Post, the newspaper that was her work home for 40 years, is back. Hello, Ruth.
Hello, but I also am not saying anything after the long hello.
And yet you did.
Yeah, apparently.
This week on the Gabfest, the showdown between a federal judge and the Trump administration over a mass deportation and whether that means we're in a constitutional crisis and what would that mean. Then we'll chew over the fascinating interview that Ezra Klein did with Democratic data scientist David Shor about the nature and the depth of the Democrats' crisis. Then what's going on in the Trump-Putin-Ukraine negotiations. Plus we will have cocktail chatter. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. Decisions made in Washington can affect your portfolio every day. But what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast from Charles Schwab that unpacks the stories making news in Washington right now and how they may affect your finances and portfolio. Listen at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. So the constitutional crisis that has been predicted, anticipated since Trump stormed back into the White House seems to be here, and it's here on grounds that are, I would say, are unfortunately quite favorable to the president, at least aesthetically. It exploded last week when Trump invoked an obscure 1798 law, the Alien Enemies Act, that even Ruth, I bet, had never heard of, to unilaterally declare that the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua was more or less at war with the United States, then summarily deported several hundred men supposedly associated with that gang to a notorious prison in El Salvador where they're being housed at U.S. government expense. That's not really the crisis. I mean, that is interesting and, you know, has all sorts of interesting public policy issues. The crisis is the government's defiant response when ordered by Justice James Jeb Boasberg to turn planes around, the planes that were carrying the men around, and as well as to not launch any more planes towards El Salvador until the legality of the expulsion was explored and resolved. So, Ruth, what did the Trump administration do, or what is it doing that tiptoes up to or crosses the line into failing to acknowledge the authority of the judicial branch and thus creating some form of constitutional crisis?
Well, we've been having these discussions for weeks now about what exactly a constitutional crisis would be. I think it's really clear that when an administration, a president, refuses to obey a court order, we are in constitutional crisis territory, maybe extraterritoriality, as it were. And so what happened here was that Judge Boasberg from the bench, and by the way, you might have given him a promotion to Justice Boasberg, and I'd be fine with it.
That'd be fine.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that. Let's just do it. Confirmed. I vote yay. Judge Boasberg had an emergency hearing. He was away for the weekend. They had it by Zoom, and he apologized for not wearing his robes. It was an emergency hearing because there were planes lined up on the tarmac or in the air to expel these Venezuelan migrants. And he said very clearly to the government lawyer, do not let these planes take off. And if they're in the air, have them turned around. I do not want these people disembarking from the planes, because once you're on another country's territory, that becomes even more complicated. So I need you to tell this to your client right away. And the government lawyer, message received. As it turned out, the planes were in the air. They were, the government claimed, out of U.S. airspace. And so the government made two arguments when it appeared before a not very happy Judge Boasberg, but let's just call him Justice Boasberg, on Monday. The government said, look, you, Judge Boasberg, issued a written order after your verbal order. And so that written order didn't mention the turning the planes around. So we don't need to listen to what you said from the bench. Judges, by the way, do not take very kindly to this. An order is an order, whether it's written or verbal. The second thing the government said was, and by the way, the planes were already gone from U.S. airspace, so you have no jurisdiction to turn them around. This is equally ridiculous because, hello, these are U.S. government chartered planes. They are filled with U.S. Marshals or other folks who are taking these prisoners to a jail in a foreign country that is being paid for by the United States government. It's more like a private prison than a foreign jail. And the notion that once you've somehow crossed this magical line, even though there's U.S. officials in charge of these prisoners, is just kind of ridiculous. If the government argued, okay, you don't have any authority over this plane, so we're going to just dump the prisoners off the plane, drop them in the ocean or the Gulf of America or whatever it is, nobody would say that that's acceptable. And so Judge Boasberg said, well, I need to understand what exactly is going on here. Can you answer a few questions for me? Like, how many planes? How many migrants? When exactly did they take off? And the government said, forget about it. None of your business, buddy.
I do worry these are pretty unattractive plaintiffs in the sense that I don't think anyone really, we have no idea if these people are actually members of a gang, or if they are members of this gang, what they do for this gang. But nobody is so excited to be like, yes, let's keep members of, brutal criminal enterprises in the United States. That sounds awesome. So is this a, I guess, unfertile ground for a constitutional crisis if you are somebody who wants to protect the rights of the judiciary to do their job?
In the cage match that is the public conversation in a lot of our public life, yes, bad facts for anybody who would like to follow the Queensberry rules of boxing, because those rules don't apply when somebody's lifted a folding chair over their head. However, and it seems to me there's a test, and Ruth, as a lawyer, can jump in here. It seems to me there's a test, and Chief Justice John Roberts, which we should mention this chapter later, tried to weigh in and kind of reset the norms of why we have a judicial process and why we have due process. And he didn't get very far. But in these moments of where the facts are bad, it seems to me that the reason you have a system of law is that when it looks like it's a slam dunk case, those are the instances in which a person can get swept up, an innocent person can get swept up. And in this case, the prison in El Salvador is a black hole. Our Lily Luciano traveled to that prison. It is both a show prison and actual reality, a black hole. And she did a story last night about a man who was a barber, who the Americans and the Venezuelans said had no criminal history and who has now just disappeared. And so Boasberg, as I understand it, didn't say this is unconstitutional when he first was presented with this. He said, well, just hang on a minute. You've got these people you say are violent criminals, and good for you. Don't want them on the streets. But since you've got them, let's not hurry them into the air so that we can go through the process of thinking this through. And what do we have to think through? We have to think through whether a president is declaring this wartime power in a time of peace. That's interesting. Maybe that might or might not be the case now, but let's check that out. Let's think that through. And also, did the people that are on the plane get the sufficient due process? And if they don't get it because of this law, is that right? And then also, are you respecting the law more broadly? As Ruth said, even this sort of playing footsie with ignoring judges' orders is not really the way you're supposed to behave in front of judges, because you're supposed to respect the institution. So let's sort all that out. Since you've got these people in custody, let's sort that out so we don't do some damage by mistake. That all seems thoroughly reasonable. And that this is the question to Ruth. As a lawyer, Ruth, even if you're a lover of Donald Trump, if you still believe in the legal system, doesn't one want to raise one's hand and say, hey, you're damaging something bigger here, which is due process, which is the legitimacy of the legal system at all, because these facts are so good in terms of public relations for the White House, you're nevertheless injuring something here that is fundamental and important in the American system.
Absolutely. And I think you've seen from the Wall Street Journal editorial page to the National Review some real revulsion among legal conservatives at the notion that when you disagree with a lower court judge's order, there is a mechanism for doing that. And that mechanism is not tweeting oopsie, as the president of El Salvador did, to be retweeted by the Secretary of State of the United States. It is to appeal the order. That is happening right now. But I kind of want to take some issue with the notion of bad facts. Okay, yes, a criminal gang of Venezuelans running rampant through the streets of America are not good facts. But that is actually not what we have here. We have some number of Venezuelans, we don't actually know how many, who were held in custody. They were not terrorizing the innocent citizens of America. They were held in custody. It wasn't a question of whether they got enough due process. It was a question of whether they got any due process. Whether, as David said, the Alien Enemies Act, which, by the way, they do not teach in law school because it has only been invoked 3 times in our history, all during declared wars, by the way, against a foreign government. This is not what we have here. And there is no clear evidence, because there has been no fact-finding, that all of these people, let's assume 3 of them are not members of Tren de Aragua, okay? One of the plaintiffs in the case says, I was identified as a member of Tren de Aragua because I have tattoos. And, some certain tattoos are associated with this group. But I have these tattoos because I am a tattoo artist. I have a family here in America. I have these other things. I have no criminal record. Tom Homan, the border czar, says, well, we checked all these people out. You know what? I would like to trust a federal judge looking at this, or some kind of immigration judge, or somebody over Tom Homan.
One of the things that is interesting about this episode, and which I think is only going to increase as it escalates, is that it pits the 2 fundamental ideas of the Republican Party over the past 50 years against each other. The one fundamental idea for most of my adult life, most of my life, the project of the Republican Party has been to build a strong conservative legal infrastructure to get conservatives on the Supreme Court. And a huge amount of the effort in politics was to ensure that. And it was a victory. And it was to build this very powerful infrastructure of judges and lawyers who could make decisions that would be favorable to conservative causes. And that's been a huge success. But it now has run up against the other project, which is this sort of Trumpist project of a supremacist authoritarian presidency, the unitary executive, untrammeled. And it is interesting to watch these 2 things come into conflict, because the people who are on the Supreme Court, and I would name them as Brett Kavanaugh, who's a dear friend of Jeb Boasberg,
Justice.
Yeah.
Justice Kavanaugh, Judge Boasberg, I'm going to get it right there. They're friends. John Roberts, Justice Barrett, those are people who I think are quite interested in this conservative legal triumph, but they're interested in preserving these legal institutions. And it's going to be interesting to watch as these cases get to the Supreme Court and get to appeals court judges who are conservative but believe in law, like how this unfolds and whether President Trump, sort of recedes or rescinds any of this authoritarian action that he's taking. Because in so many countries, like in a Poland or in a Hungary, it is the independent judiciary, often conservative judges in independent judiciary, that have proven to be the resistance, the most powerful resistance against authoritarian executives. And whether that's going to be the case here in the U.S. is going to be, I mean, it's a really important question, but we don't even know the answer yet.
Is it all the way, David, as you describe, or is there kind of a third camp, which is unitary executive plus, which is to say, I think you could believe in the unitary executive theory or just supermuscular presidential theory and agree that in lots of instances, the judges shouldn't get in the way of executive authority and executive action. But still, the judiciary has a role to play. What we are in now, as Trump has attacked Boasberg, is he's gone beyond saying he should be impeached. He's saying that he's a far-left lunatic, which would surprise the people who supported Hillary Clinton, because Boasberg allowed Clinton's emails to be released. Secondly, he also protected Donald Trump's taxes. So he's not the far left lunatic that Trump claims. But Trump also said, he's not elected, as if anybody who's not elected has no power to determine, right? So the whole idea of checks and balances, it's no longer in operation. Those attempts to undermine the judiciary and judicial review as a concept, seems to me I think there might be, and perhaps I'm wrong, but there is a group of unitary executive people who nevertheless still believe that the judiciary has a role in the American system.
I think that's exactly right, John. I think that the belief in the unitary executive only goes so far. The belief in the unitary executive and its power against Congress is one thing. But when this unitary muscular overreaching executive starts telling federal judges, no, not going to answer your question, really would prefer not to, you're a radical left lunatic, that's when the judiciary and its instincts to protect itself kick in. They're not elected for a reason. I think this is a very odd fight. I mean, I understand David's important political point that unelected judges appointed by Democratic presidents standing up for Venezuelan gang members might not be the best thing. But at the same time, if your goal is to win in court, going up against Jeb Boasberg, who's really one of the most respected federal judges in America, he's no Eileen Cannon, for instance, or Matthew Kacsmaryk, two Trump-appointed lower court judges who we've heard about in the past. Going up against Jeb Boasberg, going up against him in a way that is the most astonishingly disrespectful way to approach a judge that I think I've ever seen the United States government promote in court, asking for him to be removed from the case, which is not going to happen. The appeals court in D.C. is having arguments next week on the government's appeal of Judge Boasberg's motion. And I suspect that we are not going to hear happiness on the part of this. This is a mixed panel of Democratic and Republican appointees, that they are not going to be happy with the government's point of view here. And so it might be a good political strategy, but it's a really sucky litigation strategy.
Can I ask you a question, Ruth? It seemed to me in looking at all these many legal responses to Trump's many executive actions, that judges often, when the state has a kind of weak case, they will sometimes say very sharp things about how weak the state's case is. But it feels like in a lot of these Trump cases, and I'm thinking about USAID, I'm thinking about the rulings, the two different rulings on probationary workers, the judges have said, you guys don't have the goods. You've lied to the court, which it seems like there's an extra place with these rulings that have said that the administration is just either straight out lying. The reason that to me is important is Jeb Boasberg is trying to say, wait, where's the evidence of that these people should be, he's looking for the facts that they might have gathered to take the steps that they did. And the White House is saying, we're not going to tell you. But all these other judges have asked a similar thing and have either accused the administration of lying or said, you don't have the goods. Is that new territory, or does that happen all the time with judges and I'm overreading it?
No, I don't think so. I think judges are people too. Judges get put out when they feel disrespected or when they see their colleagues who they respect disrespected. They look at the totality of events. They have Justice Department lawyers coming in front of them, unable, and in some sense, I feel sorry for at least some of the Justice Department lawyers, because they come in front of them and they say, we can't really tell you. We literally don't know. We don't know who's running Doge. We don't know how many people have been fired today. But they see this totality of craziness that's happening and anarchy, and they are getting frustrated because judges tend to expect answers and they're not getting them.
So this was not the only example this week of the Trump administration sort of performing outrages against the law. There was the expulsion of the Democrats on the Federal Trade Commission, which is essentially this effort to essentially abolish the idea of the independent commission, the quasi-independent commission, by asserting total presidential authority over it. Something similar at the private nonprofit U.S. Institute of Peace, where the board was, at least in some superficial way, the board was fired so that the Trumpy members of the board who were not fired were able to then, I'm using all these words in quotes, fire the president, install a new president, and start to more or less close this private organization down. And I just wonder, Ruth, whether any of the people in the conservative judiciary who have been so strong in support of the unitary executive are going to have any kind of buyer's remorse over it now that they see it in action. Like, could we see like a Neil Gorsuch being like, you know what, I did believe in the unitary executive, but my goodness, when you get rid of the FTC as an independent agency, when you get rid of private nonprofits like this, maybe it's not exactly what I thought I was getting.
Well, as it happened, we were cocktail chattering this in my home just last night, because my husband was the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission during a Democratic administration and cares a lot about this question. I think that no is my answer, that they are that the conservative justices look at some of the chaos of the Trump administration and the overreaching of the Trump administration, and will be willing to say it has gone too far. It will say it has gone too far in issues of birthright citizenship. It will say it has gone too far in issues, perhaps, I'm pretty confident of this, of congressional impounding funds, not spending the way Congress said money should be spent. But getting rid of independent agencies has been such a passion project of conservative luminaries like John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh.
Can you imagine if that was your passion project, just by the way? Like, my passion project is birdhouses. No, my passion project is getting rid of the FTC.
But not just the FTC. There are many independent agencies, and they are the headless fourth branch of government, Mr. Plotz. And they want to get rid of it. They think it's a terrible incursion on the executive powers. These are people who grew up in Republican administrations and don't want to have to deal with independent agencies. And so I think whatever pique they have at the Trump administration or concerns they have about the Trump administration, I'll be very surprised, though there will be joy in the Marcus Leibowitz house, if the administration's effort to fire these FTC commissioners, I believe that will succeed. Humphrey's executor will be no more. It will be as dead as Humphrey.
Who already started out really dead, which is why his
Humphrey, for listeners, was a FTC commissioner who was fired by that terrible radical FDR.
The funny thing about thinking about FDR, and so he was fired and then died, and that's why his executor was involved in the case.
They wanted back pay.
The funny thing about thinking about FDR is, and this idea of independent agencies and who has control over what, if the majority in Congress had the sense of themselves that the members of the House and Senate had during FDR's time, they would be on TV all day long saying, how dare this upstart president think he has the power to do these things to these congressionally mandated agencies. They would say the same about his moves within even his own administration. As listeners of the Gabfest know, this is now my 9,000th citation of the marches on Washington when FDR asked for simply some control over his executive agencies from Congress. It was seen as a massive dictatorial power grab. But those kinds of members of Congress who saw themselves as the stewards of the American story, who saw themselves as the place to monitor liberties and freedom on an ongoing basis, not these sort of political people who are elected every 4 years. That mindset is so non-existent in the majority that they're not a part of this conversation. But it's not crazy to think that they should be seeing as they are one of the co-equal branches of government, and they have a building that's got a lot of marble and people go visit it, but they're not really a part of this conversation.
This episode of the Gabfest is brought to you by Saks Fifth Avenue. Shopping at Saks is the easiest way to discover the best new styles to elevate your everyday look, especially when you're short on time. My girlfriend and I have a wedding to go to in a few weeks, and so she was looking around for a wedding dress, a dress to wear to a wedding, I should say. And so she was looking in the cocktail and party dress section on Saks.com, which is amazing and endless. There's so many hundreds of dresses. It was mesmerizing. She was checking out an Allison Olivia dress. There was an Ellie Tahari dress, a Carolina Herrera dress, all of which were so tempting for her and such a chance to kind of zhuzh up for this wedding we have coming up. So whether you're refreshing your entire wardrobe or shopping for a vacation, Saks makes it fun and easy. If you're looking for a fun, effortless shopping experience and want to elevate your personal style, head to Saks. That's Saks.com for everyday inspiration. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Mint Mobile. It's important to keep your money where you can see it. That's why it's time to say bye-bye to crazy high wireless bills, bogus fees, and quote-unquote free perks that actually cost more in the long run. Have a look at Mint Mobile. Even Slate's president, Charlie Kammerer, is using Mint Mobile. And Charlie says more people should be trying this out. It was really easy to switch providers. The SIM card was shipped to his home, and they let him use his existing phone. He didn't even have to change his phone number. He's on the $15 a month deal and is getting unlimited talk and text over their 5G network at literally a fraction of what he was paying with someone else. Mint Mobile offers premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month, and all plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. If you like your money, Mint Mobile is for you. Shop plans at mintmobile.com/Gabfest. That's mintmobile.com/Gabfest. Upfront payment of $45 for a 3-month 5GB plan required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. Weird and cannibalistic, perhaps, do a podcast segment about a podcast, but we do want to talk about the extraordinary interview by Ezra Klein of the New York Times with David Shor, who's the head of data science at Blue Rose Research. David Shor is what Nate Silver was to 2016. David Shor is and more to Democratic circles in 2024. He's the person a lot of people listen to about polling and data. Shor is making the rounds with a slide deck about why Democrats are in such trouble, and his conversation with Klein is fascinating. I would really commend you to either read the transcript or listen to the interview to get the full breadth of it. We're going to get into some of the details, the crosstabs, as John Dickerson might put it. But let us start with the basics, John. What, according to Shor, are the key shifts in the electorate between 2016 and 2024?
Well, because some of the big ones are among minority groups moving from 2016 to 2024. He starts out with that slide, basically showing how Hispanics in particular more, but also African Americans and some and Asians as well, shifted to Donald Trump from 2016. The finding that gets a lot of attention and is quite interesting, not just for the purposes of politics, but also I would say there are three. I'll do the medium one and then the one that they spent some time looking at. The other is that the argument that the lower information a voter is, the less frequent a participant in the electoral process a voter is, the more likely they are to vote for Donald Trump. And that has, I think, some interesting parts to it. And then the third group that they were most interested in was this extraordinary split between young men and women in their support of Trump versus not. And then also that was encased in a finding about young voters no longer being, and this is, what was interesting about the analysis is the speed with which some of these flips are happening. The flip of younger voters, younger men in particular, to the sort of Trump world happening at a pretty fast clip.
Ruth, any others that stuck out to you or any others you want to start with?
That was a really good summary. I think I would add the degree to which these voters seem wanting to tear the place down. They want they understand that Trump might be going too far and is too much, but they also simultaneously want radical change, and they're going to have it. And while they get Trump's deficits, not actual fiscal deficits, but personal and characterological deficits, they are all for blowing the place up. And so while they have concerns about Elon Musk, they seem to me to be sort of torn. Maybe Elon Musk is too much, but blow the place up. And that really resonates with what I hear from voters.
I would add a couple of the other points that Shor makes that really stood out to me. One was when you look at issue polling about issues that matter and who you trust on them, and there are basically no issues that really matter to people where voters trust Democrats as opposed to Republicans.
It's all about the eggs.
Yeah, the issues that matter to people, which are prices, state of the economy, maybe border security in particular, are all issues that they overwhelmingly trust Republicans on. Healthcare is the only one where Democrats even have a little bit of an opening. It's an issue that matters to people, and they kind of trust Democrats. And the issues where they really trust Democrats are issues that just aren't that important to people, like, unfortunately, abortion or LGBTQ rights.
Or what we talked about in the first segment, which is the protection of democratic institutions. Democrats spent a lot of time focusing on that, understandably and correctly so, on the merits in the 2024 election, and it did not pay off. And the one other thing that I would add that I forgot to add before was this is not a uniquely, according to Shor, American phenomenon. Yeah. The impulses here seem to be like the Venezuelan flights. They don't stop at our shores.
That's a great point. Because that helped expand and also make more complex some of these changes that he identified. These weren't the idiosyncratic, just American factors. However, on that second thing, which is the low information voter, they have an exchange, which I thought was helpful, about obviously the role that inflation in the economy plays. And so the issue opinions of people who are not participating in politics all the time were heavily weighted towards both daily experience and in the negative for Democrats, which is to say that there was a Democratic president when prices were high. And so some portion of those low information voters went to the Republicans and have long-term thoughts about how Republicans are better on those issues than Democrats. And it seems to me what's interesting about that for the long-term health of that party, the Democratic Party, what is a finding that is the result of the conditions of the 2024 election, which were, post-COVID inflation, and that was a global phenomenon. And what are the conditions that are really stuck, that the Democratic Party is stuck with, like the split between men and women, the siloing of media, both to men and women and liberals and conservatives. Like, those seem more structural and long-lasting. Inflation and prices in the economy may be shifting right under our feet. You see Trump's numbers on the economy getting worse, and so that might change, and that may be more temporary.
Did you guys come away from this interview with a sense that the one that I had, which was dread and depression, which is that he talks at various points about how things might shape up in 2028 when there is, let's say, a more attractive, saner version of Donald Trump as a Republican nominee. And it seems absent, economic collapse or rampant inflation or something, it just felt to me like Democrats are screwed.
Well, I had two thoughts on that. One, I do think he has no particular solutions for Democrats right now. Like, he definitely doesn't have any. He has very minor tactical ideas, like talk about Social Security, talk about Medicare, talk about Elon Musk, talk about data privacy. That will help you. But he doesn't have sort of broader salvation notes for Democrats. But on your particular point, Ruth, I think so. Shor is floating the theory, which is that Trump is actually a drag on Republicans, and that once he leaves, whoever the Republican leader is will have all these issues that are favorable to Republicans and none of Trump's baggage. I actually don't subscribe to that. I subscribe to a different theory, which is that Trump alone, or Trump uniquely, at least so far in American public life, has the wicked charisma to carry off the lies and hypocrisies and that create the kind of energy and the sense that he is the burn it all down figure, and he is burning it all down. And that there's basically no one else in the American political landscape who could do the kind of things that Trump is doing and say the kind of things that Trump is doing and not seem like ridiculous. And I kind of feel like whoever comes afterwards, if you had a technocrat trying to do what Trump is doing, that would be an extremely unappealing political candidate. And so I'm not so sure that the Republican, the GOP position is so distinguishable from Trump as Shor makes it seem to be.
I sort of agree. It takes, or one other thing I would add is it takes an extraordinary internal combination of humors to behave the way Donald Trump does. And the Republican Party has signed up for it 100%. But it's hard to say sustain for most politicians because they have some shame.
They're normal, yeah, like they're human beings.
They and that sense of shame may not be earnest. I don't want to give politicians too much, but they know that, or they have come up in a system where some sense of shame is a quality you might need to have in some certain instances. And basically, it's very hard to carry off what Donald Trump has been successful in carrying off. And while there are many people who've run in behind him and attached their fortunes to him, I don't know, as many of us in other careers have attached our fortunes and our admiration to figures, but attaching our admiration and affections to them do not make us them.
I'm going to associate myself with the Shorian view of things. I wish this weren't true, but I do think that while Donald Trump is uniquely charismatic, as you say, David, I think that people are willing to tolerate the craziness because they want the disruption and they want the change and they want the we're not going in the right direction and we need somebody who can bring that to us. And I think there's many Trump voters who would be happier voting for Trumpism without Trump.
I wonder what the timeline on that is, though, right? Like, so you want it all blown up, but then what if it just keeps getting more bad? Like, at what point does someone stop wanting it all blown up when blowing it up? Because we're in blowing it up right now.
Yeah,
for sure.
When you don't get your Social Security checks, when the line at the national park this summer is interminable and the bathrooms are filthy, when your tariffs are messing things up for your farmers and affecting your food prices, it is possible that voters will say, we didn't mean this much. But I think that if the question is, are Republicans better off if Trump could run for a third term? I think they could be. I hate to say this. I really hate to say this. I don't want the sentence to come out of my mouth, but they could be better off with a J.D. Vance.
Well, we're going to find out. I do think we will find out. I want to touch on one other issue that Shor raised that was really interesting to me because it is a mystery. And that's TikTok, which is that he identifies that people who are kind of heavily involved in TikTok, men, I think this is unique to men, but I could be wrong. Young men involved in TikTok moved much more rapidly towards the right than others, like significantly to the right. And he has no causative explanation. Like no one really knows what it is. And I wondered whether either of you wanted to dash your head against an explanation and see what comes out.
Can I ask a definition of terms question? Is it TikTok alone, or because the explanation is obviously in the algorithm. But the question is the algorithm of TikTok so different than the algorithm of YouTube or Instagram, or is it just that TikTok is the biggest player and therefore we're using it?
Well, I think there are two things. I mean, one is that the algorithm is different in the sense the algorithm of TikTok is driven by something that TikTok is doing, not by the popularity of the person who's posting something. So Facebook and Instagram, the algorithm is heavily weighted towards people who are popular. Their views what they do is seen by more people. Whereas in TikTok, it's some kind of black box where we don't know why they're showing us that. That's number one. And number two is Shor's point is definitely like that social media as a whole and the kind of the vast and sweeping and fast effects of the personal social media life on young people is a huge force in American politics that we kind of don't understand. But I think he does specifically locate it in people who are TikTok consumers are even more that way.
I'm just going to weigh in on saying the person who was most on top of this trend and deserves some kind of credit for understanding the power of TikTok is the person we've been talking about, who's Donald Trump. He got this and really capitalized on it during the 2024 campaign. And I don't know what Democrats do about that either. But they have to meet these men where they're going, which is TikTok.
Well, and then Shor's interesting point, or the larger point, is okay, you can meet him there, but like, what do you got?
Yeah,
because you, I mean, just because you went to the bar doesn't mean that they're going to let you in. I think what I took from Shor was, first of all, men and women sort towards, and the algorithms sort them more towards things that are not as directly connected to politics as the men. And when men are algorithmed into their new space, it is a space of aggression and power and ultimate fighting, and that is quite that there's a lot of nice overlap with Donald Trump as he has existed in his whole life, and so the algorithm and our appetites as men, or for according to Shor, a lot of young men, our appetites and the thrill that we get watching videos that TikTok has learned how to keep us thrilled by feeding us more of them, drives us into basically the same world of appetites that Donald Trump is so successful in harnessing. Now, the problem with that theory, of course, is that there are a great deal of women who love Donald Trump, and so it's not a perfect theory, but that's what I picked up from the reading.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Trade. Starting your day with a fresh cup of coffee is a ritual for most. It's a ritual for me, for sure. So level up your morning routine with Trade. Every bag of Trade coffee is roasted to order, and they offer a coffee subscription service that delivers freshly roasted coffee straight to your door. I have in my wonderful coffee maker right now Juggernaut coffee from Trade, and it's delicious. I'm a dark roast kind of guy. It's a dark but not too dark roast, and I'm actually literally drinking this coffee this second. I don't know if you heard that. I just spilled some on my computer. It's exactly the coffee I want. In fact, a leading podcast industry figure was at my house the other day and had a cup of coffee and said it was wonderful and asked me what it was. Trade's experts have taste tested thousands of coffees to curate over 450 amazing roasts like Juggernaut. So whether you're new to coffee or know your favorites, they will handpick the perfect coffee for you. So you just take their quiz, and in under a minute, they'll match you with your perfect coffee. And if that first bag isn't quite right, no problem. Trade will replace it for free until they nail it. And Trade's prices are on par with grocery store brands. But the quality is next level. Right now, Trade is exclusively offering Gabfest listeners 40% off your first order at drinktrade.com/Gabfest. That's drinktrade, TRADE.com/Gabfest for 40% off your first order. drinktrade.com/Gabfest.
Planned Parenthood Federation of America exists so that all people can get access to the sexual and reproductive care and education they need to make informed decisions about their health. More than 2 million patients a year rely on the services Planned Parenthood health centers provide, like STI testing and treatment, birth control, gender-affirming care, abortion, cancer screenings, and so much more. Right now, all across the country, reproductive health care and rights are under attack from public officials who are out of step with the will of the vast majority of Americans. The constitutional right to abortion, control of our bodies, and the health care we need has been stolen from us. And now politicians in 47 states, yes, 47, have introduced bills that would block people from getting the sexual and reproductive care they need. Planned Parenthood knows that equitable access to health care, including safe, legal abortion, is a human right. Right now, Planned Parenthood needs your help to protect access to health care. Donate today by visiting plannedparenthood.org/protect.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Upwork. Hiring shouldn't be a hassle or a drain on your budget. Upwork is your one-stop shop to find, hire, and pay top freelance talent, saving you time and keeping costs in check. Companies at every stage turn to Upwork to get things done and find more flexibility in the way they staff key projects and initiatives. Upwork's global marketplace is filled with top talent in IT, web dev, AI, design, admin support, marketing, and more. And posting a job on Upwork is easy. With no cost to join, you can register, browse freelancer profiles, get help drafting a job post, or even book a consultation. And from there, you can connect with freelancers and easily hire them. Upwork makes the entire process simpler and more affordable with industry-low fees. Post a job today and hire tomorrow with Upwork. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That is Upwork.com to post your job for free and connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com. There is or is not a partial ceasefire in Ukraine. The Trump and Putin had a long phone call this week where Putin may or may not have agreed to not attack energy infrastructure or energy and infrastructure in Ukraine as long as Ukraine did the same, though hours after the supposed agreement, there was a Russian attack on a power plant in Ukraine, so who knows. Let's discuss this spectacle of Trump and Putin having long phone calls, twirling cords around their finger as they talk about what to do about Vladimir Zelensky. Ruth, what does Putin seem to want from these man-to-man negotiations with Trump?
He wants Ukraine, and he's going to get it. By that, I mean he wants a big piece of Ukraine. He wants Ukraine neutered, Ukraine incapable of defending itself in the future, and Ukraine without security guarantees in the future. And guess what? He's going to get it. This is not a negotiation. It's just a kind of slow running capitulation. And we know how it's going to end because Donald Trump and his folks have told us how it's going to end. And he gave up all the negotiating points because he didn't want a negotiation at the start of this quote unquote negotiation.
Russia has claimed about 20% of Ukraine's land. That goes all the way back to the invasion or the illegal annexation, whatever you want to call it, of Crimea in 2014. So I think, Putin wants that. And then he wants Ukraine. These are his out loud stated goals. One of the fascinating questions here is what each of the three leaders involved, to the extent that Volodymyr Zelensky is even involved, what their stated intentions, how much they match up with their private intentions. Putin has been pretty explicit about what he wants as Russia marches to the West. And he did it years ago at the same Munich conference that J.D. Vance told Europeans they needed to behave better. Putin basically sketched out the theory that he's been acting on in Ukraine. So what he says out loud is he wants to keep the 20% and then have Ukraine be so weakened, no more military buildup, no more buildup of forces within Ukraine, and no more support from without, that basically Ukraine could not defend itself against further whims that Putin would seek to follow. And at the moment, we don't know whether he'll get all of that.
But don't we, John?
What do you mean, don't we?
Well,
I think President Trump has made it very clear that in his worldview, that Ukraine is somehow the aggressor and not the victim here, that Russia has been treated very badly by Ukraine, and that Putin has legitimate desires that need to be accommodated. So what's the mystery?
Right. There's almost nothing in the public record to suggest that Trump is not overwhelmingly in support of the maximalist Putin position, both in the things he says and also when you listen to the president read out his conversation with Putin. There's a kind of delight in his voice that is consistent with Trump's longstanding, repeated, warm statements about Putin. And
he hates Zelensky.
And the opposite is the case of Zelensky. So, Ruth, you have a very strong case. The question is, at the end, whether whatever Trump's position is, there's any alternative that Europe would push that might come out in the negotiations that would be something less than the maximalist Putin position when other players get involved and when public opinion gets involved, and if there's anybody in Congress who wants to pipe up. I should say that while that's to be determined, we should note that one of the cards that Ukraine had to play has been removed from its hand by the actions of Donald Trump. So when Trump froze the intelligence sharing and the shipments of military supplies, Moscow took that moment to take back territory in Kursk, which Ukraine had taken. That territory that they took back was one of the pieces of leverage that Ukraine had that it no longer has. So while we're talking in theory, there is an actual reality that that has taken place where Trump's actions have profited Russia already.
I think that's a really important point, John, and it just underscores my point that other players on this stage do not have the power that we would hope they have. That is, members of Congress can moan, but they've shown no willingness to go up against Trump. European leaders can be appalled, but they don't have the capacities the United States has to help Ukraine. And when they turned off that information sharing, you just described what happened.
It sounds that what you're saying, Ruth, is given the nature of Trump, the nature of Putin, there is an inexorable settlement to this war, and we all know what it is. And so should we just get there as fast as we can so that at least there's no more death or much less death and attrition in this war? Because it's become a terrible war. It is a war of minimal territorial gain, mass death, and huge amounts of destruction. So the sooner it is over, the better in general, because it's not a winnable war for Ukraine, and it's not a winnable war for Russia either. And so, everyone kind of knows what the boundaries, the borders of the settlement are. So let's get to it. But I also think, of course, how you settle it, there sets certain parameters for how the world proceeds in the future. And it does, a settlement where Ukraine can't arm itself, or Ukraine is not allowed to, look to Europe for certain economic relationships, is a much worse world for all of us.
This doesn't matter just for Ukraine. I was asking a former government official about the future of Ukraine, and I said, well, what does this mean for Poland? It's very hard for me to accept the notion that Ukraine should just go gently, even 3 years in, that it should go gently and accept the reality of its effective defeat, because this is so intolerable. I know when this is settled, Trump will announce that he has gotten the best deal of all time because he is the best negotiator of all time. And it will be a sucky deal, and it won't be true, but he will assert it so loudly and so frequently that people will believe it's true. But the reason I can't accept that we should just sort of all roll over and go home and maybe save some lives is that this has so many deleterious consequences, not just for the future of Ukraine, but for the future of the international rule of law and the ability of countries to stand up against Russian aggression or other aggression.
And your point about Ukraine is what I was saying in terms of we think we know where Donald Trump is, and we certainly know where Putin is, but they're not the only players in this. So let's assume that Ukraine decides it doesn't want to go into this deal. Then that has some effect. Now, maybe it has no effect, but I think there are other variables yet to play. But another argument for the reason Donald Trump would be inclined to see things Putin's way is that he has other interests in Iran and with China that he thinks that a better relationship with Putin would help the U.S. with. So he's got other interests.
Well, that is attributing to him a kind of strategic mindset that he's never shown before.
I don't think that's true. Not with China and Iran. And also, they were on the phone for 2.5 hours. They weren't just talking about like
they're on the phone for 2.5 hours because he loves the idea of king to king conversation. It's like,
sure, but king to king conversation in getting Iran to end its nuclear program and in whatever he thinks Russia might be able to help him with China. I think that's exactly in the context of king for king. I don't think this was just discussion about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I think he has grand ideas about how he and Putin can settle all these other problems in the Middle East and with China, which maybe feeds back into what we had already identified in the first round of conversation, which is the sort of thrill he gets by working with Putin. But I think there are other countries. His concentration on Iran that's not something somebody tells him to do. He has that. He has an obsession with Iran, which is one of his many obsessions. But the final point I would say is, what happens when this looks like Putin basically took Trump? So what Putin's already doing now is delaying. He's doing what people who have watched Putin say he does, which is say, yes, this idea of a ceasefire is a good idea, and then sets conditions that are impossible for anybody to say yes to. If it starts to look like Putin has played Trump, and Trump as a negotiator has at times let people pretend they've played him the way one does, at some point, if it looks like Putin played Trump, yes, he might say, oh, this is the best deal possible. But at some point, he might not be able to talk over what is clearly a victory by Putin. And I wonder at what point the timeline and Trump's ego ever conflict in this story.
I am for the power, sadly, of the big lie.
In order to get this resolved.
No, that Trump will assert that he got the best deal of all time because he's the best negotiator of all time. And honestly, people out there who are worried about the price of eggs are not immersed in the details of Ukrainian territory or what happened in Kursk. And so they would like to move on. They believe that we have spent $350 billion of U.S. money in Ukraine and they want out. And this has been the most depressing hour of my life, guys. Really.
Well,
I'm never coming back.
There's no question that he will assert that. There's no question that that's the case. It's just in some instances he has asserted things and they have not turned out to be so, and that has not always worked out in his benefit. Say COVID would be a good example. So we'll see how this rolls out, but I think it's not that there's no downside when you engage in king to king conversation that it might look like the other guy took you.
Well, at least Poland is going to build nuclear weapons, so we've got that
right.
happening.
Exactly.
So that's a plus for the world. Let's go to cocktail chatter. You're coming off the most depressing hour of your life, so you need a drink, even though it's 3:00 in the morning where you are, Ruth Marcus. Practically. You're sitting down for a drink with beloved former FTC chairman John Leibovitz. What are you going to chatter to him about?
We're here in Wyoming, where it is 2 hours earlier. And John and I he wants to talk incessantly about independent agencies or Wisconsin basketball. And I'm kind of done with both of those subjects. So I would be turning the chatter to a series that I've started and really can't stop by a author named C.J. Box about a Wyoming fish and game warden named Joe Trippett. And he gets involved in, it's very Wyoming centric. It's really rooted in I'm a Wyomingite now. So it's really rooted in the culture and landscape of Wyoming. And he has these amazing adventures. This was actually first suggested to me by Hugh Hewitt. And he said, and it's about a Wyoming fish and game warden. And I was like, no, that is not what I might be reading. But they're not, masterpieces of literature, but they're kind of whodunits that are set in this landscape that I love. So that's what we would be chattering about. There are 25, I think, in this series. John started, as he is wont to do, with the 25th, and I started at the beginning, and I'm plotting my way through, or racing my way through. I think I'm up to number 6.
This is one of your passions, Ruth, because you chattered about Tana French in a previous Gabfest.
Well, I like
This
reading
is the Tana French of Wyoming.
Yes, exactly. Well, I like reading. That was when we went on a family trip to Ireland, and so I just really love reading novels or thrillers or whatever that are set in the landscape that I'm in. So I am in this snowy Tetons landscape, and the book I'm reading right now is actually set in Jackson, which is where we are, which is not ordinary Wyomingites. Real Wyomingites would tell you that is not real Wyoming, and we are a little bit of a blue enclave here.
My chatter is two pieces of delightful work that I sort of have simultaneously enjoyed. My first chatter is Everything is Tuberculosis, which is a nonfiction book by John Green, which is just delightful. I interviewed him this week, which was also wonderful. And anyway, he's just a sweet guy, and it's a tremendous book. And I encourage everyone to read it, both for the message, but also just his skill at weaving history and storytelling into a book. I also, in preparation for the interview, read and the Anthropocene Reviewed, which was a delight also. So I recommend that whole collection of things. And then also Jason Isbell's new album, Foxes in the Snow, is, I've now been listening to it for 2 weeks, and it's been an incredibly rich experience. The songwriting, the lyrics, are great. The musicianship is irritatingly wonderful. Irritating, I say, because it's like I have guitars in the house, and I just look at them as these useless things in the when I hear how beautifully he plays. Anyway, so I recommend that to any of you out there.
Jason Isbell runs some multi-level marketing scheme in which you're a top producer, John. I feel like most of your work is designed to promote Jason Isbell.
That's not true, but it is a result of the fact that I am a big fan of his work, and then also this really set the hook. I also got to talk to him about his work, and he thinks he's super intentional about the work he does and the way he works. And I'm as you know, and a huge sucker for anybody who is so intentional about the craft and then can explain it well and their process, and also do it in the storytelling way he does, which is augmented by his great accent and just his worldview.
Can I say something about Foxes in the Snow? Because we have both snow and foxes out here. And it's really extraordinary. I don't know why that's the title of the album, but what foxes do is that they have incredible senses of hearing. And so they can hear little critters way underneath the ground, and they leap up and they do this amazing nose first swan dive, like straight into the snow. 180 degrees, no splash in the snow, and they get their critter.
I love those videos. They're beautiful.
Yes, and without ruining either the song or its intent, because the intent is unknown to the listener, but that line comes in a really fascinating way and place. But it's along those lines. It's not just foxes loping through the snow looking pretty. There it is, foxes as carnivores.
I want to chatter about a house that was purchased in Washington, D.C. So last week came news that the third most expensive house sale in D.C. history had happened, and a house around the corner from me, practically, 3 blocks away, sold for $23 million to a mystery buyer. And this is a house that I walk by not infrequently.
Which house?
It's a house in Woodland Terrace in Norman Stone, and it's I forget what the address is, but it's an enormous, extremely ugly, like really epically ugly red brick house that when I looked at it, I was like, this looks like someone has built a dormitory for wayward girls and then attached it to some kind of strange barn-like structure. It's 3 houses kind of pinned together in this truly ugly way at the bottom of a quite pretty valley. But it's huge. And so there's a mystery as to who bought it. And there's a lot of speculation that it's Elon Musk. It's bought by some LLC that was a shell. And there's a lot of speculation it's Elon Musk. And when I realized which house had been sold, I was like, oh, definitely it's Elon Musk, because no normal person would buy a house like this. It's so ugly and so weird. And it's like the kind of house that actually would suit someone who has a lot of kids like Musk does. And so
15 bedrooms.
Is that right?
No, he has 14 kids, I think, at last
I think he has 12. I think he has 12 kids. But anyway, who's counting? Not him. Anyway, so this is all just preface to I started to do a little math in my head, and I was like, there's a $23 million house, which that is like 10 lifetimes of earnings for the average middle-class American, not even the average sort of upper middle-class American. It would take them 10 lifetimes to earn the amount, if they spent on nothing else to buy this house. And so I was like wondering, what does it feel like if you buy a $23 million house and you're Elon Musk? And so I thought, well, what if someone has $1 million? Like imagine a person, a rich American, they have $1 million in assets and they buy a house. What would that house have to cost for it to be sort of the equivalent to Elon Musk buying this house? And the answer is $68. So $23 million feels to Elon Musk like $68 feels to a millionaire. Like, can you imagine being in a life where I'm spending $23 million on the house. It is like buying a kind of okay dinner.
Yeah, not even a steak.
It's ridiculous.
Well, that's such an excellent mental exercise.
David, since I announced that I'm never coming back to the Gabfest, so I don't have to worry about being invited back, I do have to tell you that the Google, when you type in how many children, it fills in how many children does Elon Musk have.
Oh.
And I regret to inform you that the answer is 14.
Well, of course you're right and I'm wrong. Who would expect anything different? Anyone who's listened to the show.
I think the most expensive house in D.C. is Howard Lutnick, the
Brett
Commerce
Baer
Secretary.
house.
Yeah, he brought Brett Baer's house, yeah. Which is a nice, I've walked by that house. That's a nice house. It's okay.
Wait, Brett Baer lived in that house?
Yeah.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Fox News life is a good life,
Wow.
John Dickerson.
Oh my God.
Where did you go wrong?
Yeah, I know.
I was like,
wrong network, John.
I was like, oh wow, I will never know a person who lives in a house of that size. Because for me, it wouldn't work. It's a weird tissue rejection issue. Maybe it has to do with my upbringing and all that.
Didn't the house you grew up in, wasn't the house you grew up in like that? Yeah.
No, I mean, for its time, for its time, which is probably why I have this weird reaction.
Welcome to the therapy hour with John Dickerson.
Yeah.
Let's go to listener chatter. Listeners, you've been emailing us great chatters at gabfest@slate.com, what you're chattering about. And our listener chatter this week comes from Kevin Watanabe Smith in Portland.
Hi, Gabfest. This is Kevin from Portland, Oregon. As a cancer biologist facing the bleak future of research in America, I've enjoyed escaping with a new Netflix show called Orb on the movements of the Earth. This Japanese anime follows 15th century European citizen scientists working to prove that the Earth orbits the sun and we are not the center of the universe, while being hunted by church inquisitors. What I love about this historically inspired tale, aside from the beautiful animation and the breathtaking looks at the night sky, is the repeated theme that each character is playing one small part in a decades-long fight for truth and understanding. The humble journey of picking up work that was never yours and leaving it with the hope to an uncertain future where your part may be felt but never acknowledged. As a scientist looking back on this story, it serves as a reminder that the arcs of the universe are indeed long, both in morals and discovery.
That's all for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about Texas arresting a midwife and charging her with the crime of having performed illegal abortions. Are we back in the age of criminalizing abortions? Probably yes. That is just for Slate Plus members, however. Slate Plus members also get bonus episodes on other podcasts. They get discounts to live shows. They never hit the paywall on the Slate site. And if you are a member, thank you so much. If you're not a member, you can subscribe to Slate Plus directly from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or visit slate.com/Gabfest Plus to get access wherever you listen. That is our show for today. The Gabfest is produced by Kevin Bendis today. Our researcher is Emily Ditto. Our theme music is by They Might Be Giants. Ben Richmond is Senior Director for Podcast Ops. For the always game Ruth Marcus. Thanks so much, Ruth. And John Dickerson. I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you next week when I think Emily will be back.